And welcome to the Rob Call Bottom Up Show, available on Pacifica Radio Network and Progressive Radio Network and iTunes and Stitcher and YouTube and SoundCloud. And my guest for the show, I'm really excited about because he is just, I would say, one of the most famous, influential psychiatrists alive right now. And he's done some amazing things. David Burns, MD, wrote his book, Feeling Good, 40 years ago. It has sold over 5 million copies. He's an adjunct clinical professor emeritus of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at the Stanford University School of Medicine. More than 50,000 mental health professionals have attended his workshops, and millions have downloaded his weekly podcasts by the name Feeling Good. Now he has a new book out, Feeling Great, the revolutionary new treatment for depression and anxiety. This book offers a revolutionary idea, the paradoxical notion that your negative thoughts and feelings are actually caused not by pathology or mental disorder, but by what's most beautiful and awesome about you and your core values. And research has shown that just by reading his Feeling Good book and doing the exercises it offers, over 60% of people can lift their anxiety or depression. And Dr. Burns wasn't satisfied with that. And so now he's got this new book and a new approach that he believes offers a solution to many of the people who didn't respond before. So great to have you on the show. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. And you've been doing your homework. I'm psyched. I really appreciate that.
And what do you want this book to accomplish?
Two things, really. It's for the general public. The reason I wrote Feeling Good, when cognitive therapy came out, Aaron Beck said, "Do you want to be a co-author on the book for therapists?" And I said, "No, there's several people in our group who can, help you with that. But I think patients, I think the general public need a textbook so they can learn these techniques and use them on their own." And that's really what happened with Feeling Good. That reflected the technology of 1980, or no, 1980. Now, in my last 15 years at Stanford, we've developed powerful new techniques that are very different, that complement the cognitive techniques in Feeling Good. And once again, my goal is that people can pick up the book and use these techniques to change the way you think and feel. Sometimes I think the general public can learn new techniques faster than mental health professionals, because mental health professionals are often like in cults, the psychodynamic cult or the REBT cult or the ACT cult or this or that or the other, thing that they've been trained in. But people in the general public, they just want to know what's going to help me feel better and get out of this depression and anxiety. So that's my target audience. But my second target audience is also mental health professionals who'd like to learn how to use these techniques to boost your effectiveness in your clinical work.
So how does this book relate to drugs for depression and anxiety and your approach in general?
Well, looking at drugs first, I started out as a full-time psychopharmacologist at University of Pennsylvania Medical Center when I finished my residency. And I was also doing research on the so-called chemical imbalance theory of depression. But our research showed as early as 1975 that it was not true that depression is due to a chemical imbalance, a deficiency of serotonin, the so-called happy chemical. And we published an article in the top psychiatry journal proving that theory was false. And it's taken decades for psychiatry finally to admit that this chemical imbalance theory is just simply not valid. There was never any evidence for it. And that reflected what I was seeing clinically, because I was giving out antidepressants by the bucketful to my patients. And occasionally a patient would recover. Sometimes some of them would get a little less depressed, but not really recover. And some of them just didn't change at all. And I said that this sucks. I don't want to spend my life doing this. I was looking for something that would cause complete recovery with most patients. So I gave up my academic career. I had a grant, a tenure track position. I was supposed to stay on the faculty at the Penn Medical School. And instead, I decided to uh, go into clinical practice and help develop what was then the cognitive therapy, which I was so excited about. That's why I wrote Feeling Good. And now I'm on the voluntary faculty at Stanford, just as I was on the voluntary faculty at Penn rather than the full-time faculty. And now we've developed even more powerful techniques that I'm just so excited to share with you and with the people who are listening to the show right now.
So what are the basic cognitive therapy concepts so we can just start with a ground of definitions and a basic understanding?
Sure, it's simple. There's three ideas in cognitive therapy, and they're all revolutionary. One is ancient, and two are brand new. The first is that all of your feelings right now, even listening to this show, are caused by the messages you're giving yourself, your thoughts in the here and now. Epictetus said this, the Buddha said the same thing, that we're not upset by the events of this world, but by your thoughts about it, the interpretations of those events. And that's been known for thousands of years. It's hard to grasp. The Buddha had over 100,000 followers. They say that this is what he was saying, and only 3 people got it. The idea is so simple, you can't grasp it until you've experienced it in your own life. But what it means is that, let's say you're depressed right now. You're probably giving yourself very negative messages. I'm a loser. I'm not as good as I should be. I'm a failure. I saw a young woman who was rejected by her boyfriend after a 2-year relationship, and she told herself, I'm unlovable. Wow, that what a devastating thing to tell yourself, and I'll be alone forever. That's the kind of distorted thinking that causes depression. I saw another woman this week who discovered that her husband was having an affair and moved out and I sought a divorce attorney, and she had no idea this was going on. She was devastated. She told herself, I'm a failure as a wife. And that brings us to the second idea of cognitive therapy, is that not only do these thoughts cause your negative feelings, but they're distorted, they're illogical. Depression and anxiety are the world's oldest cons. And in my book, Feeling Good, I listed 10 thinking errors that cause depression and anxiety, like all or nothing thinking, like I'm a failure as a wife. That's all or nothing thinking. It's also self-blame. You're blaming yourself for events that you're not totally responsible for, or even maybe partially responsible for. Should statements, I should be better than I am. Emotional reasoning, I feel like a loser, so I must be one. And overgeneralization, taking a negative event and seeing it as a never-ending pattern of defeat, like the woman whose boyfriend rejected her, I'm unlovable. She's generalizing from this event to her whole self, that she has this unlovable self. And that's what causes depression, these distorted thoughts. And the third idea is you can change the way you feel when you change the way you think. But it's even more dramatic, because the very moment you stop believing those distorted thoughts, in that very instant, your depression and anxiety can vanish. Now, it's an easy, simple theory. The technology for making it happen is quite sophisticated, but that's the essence of cognitive therapy. You feel the way you think. When you're depressed and anxious, you'll be fooling yourself with distorted thoughts, which is actually good news. And when you crush those thoughts and prove to yourself that they're not true, your feelings will instantly change. And that was the cognitive revolution that I talked about in my book, Feeling Good, published in 1980, and it has transformed the history of psychology. And now we have a new revolution that's going to make, I hope and believe, an equally powerful impact.
So what does this new book offer, and what does this new revolution offer that the original cognitive therapy with distorted cognitions bring?
Well, the cognitive revolution was fantastic, and cognitive therapy and is fantastic. But the research studies have shown that all forms of psychotherapy fall short. In all the controlled outcome studies, I think there have been over 5,000 outcome studies on cognitive therapy since I published Feeling Good. And their claim to fame is their goal is to get a 50% reduction in depression. And less than 50% of the patients in these studies get that. In other words, only half the patients get even a 50% reduction. And a 50% reduction sucks because people don't want to feel somewhat better. They want to feel completely better. And that's not just a problem with cognitive therapy outcome studies. It's a problem with every form of psychotherapy. There's no form of psychotherapy in the world that has really outperformed placebos. And antidepressant drugs also do not outperform placebos. So my research has been directed to, well, how about the 50% of the people we're not helping? What's that all about? And what my research has brought me back to an original problem that Freud struggled with, but he couldn't solve it. He talked about therapeutic resistance and motivation being another huge dimension in recovery. But his solution to it was to have people lie on the couch for 5 years, 5 days a week, free associating, and it just wasn't a solution. But in the last, I would say, 15 years, I have a free training group at Stanford for Bay Area therapists, and they can come and get unlimited free psychotherapy training for the rest of their life if they want, and unlimited free therapy. And that in that group, I've developed new techniques to solve the problem of therapeutic resistance really quickly. So when I meet with a new patient now, I can bring their resistance to conscious awareness and eliminate it typically in 30 minutes. And when you eliminate a patient's resistance, then all these cognitive techniques work vastly faster, vastly more powerfully than before. And the cool thing about it is that you see, people have always taught that your depression and anxiety is because of what's wrong with you. You got a chemical imbalance in your brain. You have a mental disorder. And here we have a book right here. For here it is, the DSM from the American Psychiatric Association. And there's hundreds of pages of so-called mental disorders. And so we're teaching people, if you have social anxiety, if you're shy, you have a mental disorder, social anxiety disorder. If you worry, you have a mental disorder, generalized anxiety disorder. If you're depressed, you have a mental disorder, major depressive disorder, or dysthymic disorder. And the problem is this makes people feel broken and defective, and like the therapist is supposed to fix you. And what we've discovered is amazing, that depression and anxiety actually are not the result of what's wrong with you, but what's right with you, what's most beautiful about you and your core values.
I love that aspect of your new model that you've described. So get into that. Get it.
Yeah. And so my job is no longer to fix a broken patient, but to argue that they shouldn't change, because all the fantastic things that their negative feelings reveal about them. And the paradox is, the moment the patient becomes proud of their symptoms rather than ashamed, they don't need them anymore. And then recovery is a stone's throw away. And I can give you some examples if you like.
Yeah. How about giving a story now? Tell us a story that gives an example of that.
Sure. There's many stories in my book, Feeling Great, and all of the stories are actually, you can hear the real therapy session on my podcast to prove to yourself, if you don't believe these people really recovered, thank you, in one therapy session. But a woman in one of the early chapters named Karen, and she'd been struggling for 9 years with horrible shame, depression, anxiety, and anger. And the event that triggered it was that her 12-year-old daughter said, "Mommy, can I go out and play tonight after dinner?" And she'd been doing that for years. And Karen kind of had mixed feelings of, well, maybe it's not such a good idea, but then it's a little later than usual. Yeah, go ahead, take your jacket, and it's fine. And then 2 neighborhood boys snuck up on her daughter, and they had a high-powered pellet rifle. and they went right up and aimed it at her face from a foot away and shot her in the face. And the pellet hit a tooth, which exploded and caused a tremendous amount of damage to her mouth and face. She ran inside screaming in pain, blood gushing out of her mouth. And this led to 9 years of surgeries to correct the damage and treatment for her daughter's post-traumatic stress disorder, failed therapy, I might add. And so Karen volunteered to be a patient in a workshop so I could demonstrate the therapy live. And she'd been struggling for 9 years. And again, it wasn't the event, which was horrible, but Karen's thoughts. And what she was telling herself is, and she sobbed in saying this, I'm a failure as a mother. I never should have let her go out and play. I've got to spend the rest of my life making it up to her. I can never allow myself to be happy when my daughter is suffering. And then she had another negative thought. There were about 135 therapists there in the audience watching. It was a training program I was doing. She was saying, I'm sure the people in the audience here are also judging me and thinking I'm a failure as a mother. I'm a bad mother. And she was just sobbing when she was verbalizing these highly distorted negative thoughts. Now, before I tried to get her to challenge these thoughts, which were really brutal and kind of unfair, but we have to eliminate her resistance. And that means finding, what do these negative thoughts and feelings show about you, Karen, that's positive and awesome? Because I said, suppose we have a negative, a magic button, a red magic button. And if you press it, all your suffering will disappear in a flash, and you'll go into a state of euphoria with no effort. Will you press that button? She said, I'd press it in a heartbeat. I am so sick and tired of suffering. I prayed every day to God, and nothing has worked to relieve my depression, my anxiety. So, yeah, there's a magic button. There you go. There it is. And she said, yes, I'd press it. And then I say, well, we don't have a magic button, but I do have some pretty amazing, almost magical techniques, but I don't think we should use them. I'm not convinced it would be a good idea. And she said, well, why not, Dr. Burns? I've been trying for 9 years to recover. If you've got techniques, please show me how to use those techniques. And I said, well, maybe first we better see what these negative thoughts and feelings show about you that's positive and awesome. Like, first of all, you're feeling guilty and ashamed and telling yourself you're a bad mother, a failure as a mother. What does that thought show about you that's positive and awesome? She said, well, I can't think of anything. And I said, well, does it show that you have high standards? And she said, oh, yes, absolutely, I have high standards. And I say, have they been helpful to you? She says, oh, yeah, it's motivated me. I do every conceivable thing to help my daughter. And in my career, I've got tremendously high standards too, and I've achieved a great deal. And I said, wonderful. What else do all these self-criticisms show about you that's positive and awesome? And she said, well, maybe that I'm realistic because I have many flaws. So when I say I'm a failure, I'm owning up to the fact that I have flaws. I said, absolutely. Is that important to be honest and realistic about your flaws? She said, oh, absolutely. I said, what else does it show about you? And she said, well, maybe it shows that I'm humble. I said, absolutely. And she is the most humble and gracious person you'd ever want to come across. And so add that to your list. Is that important? She says, oh, that's important to my spiritual life. That's a spiritual quality to be humble. And then it also shows that she's accountable. Instead of blaming the world, she's looking within. What did I do wrong? What should I change? And then what's positive and awesome, Karen, about your anxiety? You're worrying. What's beautiful about that? And she said, well, maybe I worry to protect my daughter. The last time I let my guard down, she got shot in the mouth. I said, absolutely, you're worrying is an expression of your love for your daughter. And she says, oh, I see what you mean. And I said, now, if you press that magic button, all your sadness and depression will go away. You'll be euphoric. Is that what you want? Today, you want to feel euphoric about the fact that your daughter's still suffering 9 years later? She said, oh, no, no, no. It's good to be sad and depressed. I said, absolutely. That shows what a beautiful mother you are. And how about your anger? What's awesome about your anger? And she said, well, maybe it shows I have a moral compass, a sense of fairness, a sense of justice. Like those parents never should have let those boys go out and play with other children with a loaded rifle. I said, right on. And I said, in addition, your anger, that's like a mama bear protecting her cubs. And she said, you're right. So we came up with this list of 25 awesome things that her symptoms showed about her. And then I said, well, Karen, given all these 25 things that are real and powerful, beautiful things about you, why in the world would you want to press that magic button? Because then all these things will disappear and go down the toilet with all your negative thoughts and feelings. She says, you're right. And she says, now I'm confused because I don't want to suffer anymore, but I don't want all these beautiful things to disappear. And then I said, well, maybe instead of a magic button, we could have a magic dial and just dial them down to some lower level where you could feel a lot better, but keep all these beautiful things about you. And she said, let's do that. And I said, how? You're like 90% depressed. You're as depressed as almost as a human being can be. You're as depressed as the patients in the Stanford Hospital are getting electroconvulsive therapy, but you're around working, you're being a beautiful mother, you're doing well in your career. How depressed would you want to be at the end of today's session? She said, well, 10% I think would be enough. And I said, well, can I sell you on 20%? Are you sure you want to go all the way down to 10%? She said, oh no, 10 is enough, I assure you. And so she wanted to lower her anxiety from 100 to 5 and reduce her shame from 80 and guilt to down to maybe 2%, she said would be enough, and reduce her anger to 10%. And now I've made a deal with her subconscious resistance. You see, I've said, we'll lower them to this level, but not all the way. And then I said, I have to warn you, the techniques are so powerful that they may go all the way to 0, but don't worry, because if you get too undepressed, too happy, I'll help you work your anxiety, your depression up to 10% before the end of the session. And then she started laughing. I knew I had her already. And then we just went and challenged these negative thoughts and did role play to smash the thought. I had her do an experiment to test the belief that people in the audience were judging her. She believed that firmly, and I said, well, could we test that? And she says, I suppose I could ask them. And I said, does that make you anxious? She said, oh yes, do I have to do that? And I said, well, if you want to find out, you're going to have to confront your fear. And she said, well, if I ask them, they won't be honest anyway. And I said, you don't know that. That's another negative thought. First, you can ask them if they're judging you. And then you can ask them if they're telling the truth or lying between their teeth just to make you feel good. She says, I'm going to do it. So she asked, would any of you come up to the microphone? Because a friend had his cell phone. He was making an amateur video and thought it'd be good to have a video of it. And so 10 people rushed up to the microphone and she said, are you judging me? And they were all in tears, sobbing and saying, Karen, you're our hero. To get up and talk about something so personal in front of 135 colleagues, mental health professionals, that takes tremendous courage. And I just think you're the most beautiful mother in the world. And, I love you. And they were sobbing when they were saying these things, men and women. And then she began sobbing, and she saw how off these distorted thoughts were. And her anxiety and depression, her symptoms not only went to 0, but she estimated some of them at the end of the session. Like she said, her guilt had gone and shame from plus 100 to minus 1,000, more than complete recovery. And she said her frustration had gone from 90 to minus 1,000,000. And she was really in a state of I would say, enlightenment or euphoria.
That's a
And
story.
that that's what I try to bring about. It's not just a reduction of depression, a fast and total elimination of depression and anxiety, and shooting in the other direction into enlightenment. That's what people want. They want to feel a sense of joy and not just somewhat less depressed.
So we need to take a break now, and then we're going to come back. And I want you to talk about the double standard technique. Did you
Sure.
use it with her?
Yeah, I lost your audio there, but yeah, we'll come back right after the break. We can talk about the double standard technique for sure. Are you still with me there?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, you're visually frozen a little bit.
And my guest for the show is David Burns, MD. He is the author of a new book, Feeling Great, the Revolutionary New Treatment for Depression and Anxiety. And he has given workshops that over 50,000 mental health professionals have attended, and millions have downloaded his weekly podcasts, Feeling Good, which you can get to at feelinggood.com. So we were talking about your patient, Karen, who was feeling guilty as a mother because her daughter was attacked once when she let her daughter go out to play. And I ask you, did you use the double standard technique with her? And could you explain what that is and how that works?
I used other techniques with her, but I'd love to explain the double standard. We used externalization of voices and the experimental technique and identified the distortions and the acceptance paradox, a number of techniques that were in addition to the experiment with the audience that were helpful to her. But the double standard technique is one that our listeners or viewers might really like, and it's one of over really 100 techniques I've developed to help people overcome depression and anxiety. But one of the things is that a lot of us have really, high standards, which is good in a way, but our high standards can sometimes really cause distress for us, and we tend to start beating up on ourselves when we screw up or fall short, and I'm not good enough, and I shouldn't have made that mistake, and I should be better than I am, in a really brutal way, that we would not talk like that to someone else we really loved and cared about. Uh, and I can give you an example. When I was in Philadelphia for a while, I had developed this program at Presbyterian Medical Center. It was a huge cognitive therapy program. And we treated all the patients in groups with cognitive therapy. And and then I used to go into the groups to see how are they working with this population, because we had a lot of homeless people. It was an inner city neighborhood, and the people in our program, they didn't have many resources at all. And I remember one of the groups I was in, the nurses told me that there was would be a woman in my group who was a beautiful mother, but that she was really hard on herself and telling herself that she was a failure and so forth. And so I worked with her at the start of the group, and she was telling herself, I'm a failure for getting depressed and getting hospitalized. And then my children will feel abandoned. And I should have been stronger and not gotten depressed. And she was just horribly depressed and beating up on herself. And I took her into the middle of the group, and I had two chairs, and I said, sit in this chair and imagine there's another woman here who's just like you, identical to you. She was hospitalized for her second episode of depression, and she feels like she's abandoned her children. She feels like she's a bad mother. What would you say to her? Would you tell her, you're a failure because of your depression? You should have been stronger. She says, no, I would never say that to someone I loved and cared about. I said, why not? She said, well, it's kind of mean. And secondly, it's not even true, because depression is an illness, and it's not a matter of, being strong or being weak. When people are depressed, they need compassion and support. And and I said, you're absolutely right. What would you say to that woman? And she said, I would tell her you're a beautiful mother and your children don't feel abandoned. Your husband's taking care of them. And and what you're doing is a gift to yourself and to your family to get the help you need to recover from this depression. And I said, that's great. I love what you're saying. Now, are those thoughts true? She said, oh, that's absolutely true. So I said, so if it would be true for this other woman who's just like you, then I guess you're saying it would be true for you too. She says, you're right. I said, would you be willing to talk to yourself the way you talk to a dear friend? She said, do I have a right to do that? I said, absolutely. Talk to yourself right now the way you would talk to a dear friend who was hospitalized. And then she said those words to herself. And I said, how are you feeling right now? And she says, Dr. Burns, my depression just disappeared. I'm feeling great. And that's the double standard technique. Now that's the technique that worked for her. Different techniques work for different people. So I've developed, a large number of techniques. It's not true that one size fits all, but what is true is that people can now recover with incredible speed. And that was so much fun to show in a group too, because when you show that in a group, they stop resisting and busting you. And they, instead of saying, oh, this can't work and I'm hopeless case, they say, wow, can I have some of that too? That's fantastic.
And what's really great is that your book is so comprehensive in going through the details of how to do that. I mean, it includes a lot of charts and questionnaires that people fill in to get started. It includes diaries. And then you've got these 10 different distortions. You've got a chapter on each one in there. That's amazing.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I love to give people tools. We all have strengths and weaknesses. I have tons and tons of flaws and weaknesses. The older I get, the more I realize how many flaws I have. But one strength is I've always loved explaining things in simple terms. And the best teachers I had in college or medical school were ones who could make complicated things really simple and accessible. And that's what I love doing. And if people read the first book, Feeling Good, or the new one, Feeling Great, and do the exercises in them, they'll see a tremendous change. I'm just starting, the book just came out a couple of weeks ago. I'm just starting to get tons of emails from people who have read it, which is thrilling to me. One fellow wrote, and he said, I read your book, Feeling Great. It came out yesterday and I've skimmed through it. Just skim through the whole thing, and I can tell you, Dr. Burns, that not a thing changed. It didn't help me whatsoever. So, but then that you kept saying it's important to do the written exercises. So I did this positive reframing exercise where you find out that your depression and anxiety isn't what's wrong with you, but what's right with you. And to tell you the truth, Dr. Burns, I've been depressed for 50 years. I've had 50 years of failed therapy. And when I did that exercise, I suddenly saw what was beautiful about myself and my depression, something I'd never seen before. And I suddenly spoke to myself in this kind and loving way, which was a shock, like an electric shock, Dr. Burns. I've never done that before. And my depression vanished in an instant. God bless you, Dr. Burns. And that was my first person who was cured by my new book, Feeling Great. It was such a good feeling. The first one who wrote to me when Feeling Good came out, I was totally unknown, and they just printed a small printing. The publishers were sure the book would be a failure. They wouldn't support it with anything, no marketing, no nothing. But then in 2 weeks after it came out, a medical student called me from Washington, D.C. Says, Dr. Burns, I'm reading your book, Feeling Good, and it's really helping me. Could I ask you a question? And I got so excited, I gave the guy a 3-hour free therapy session on the telephone because I thought that this might be my only fan.
Well, but it was double check with you. Do you do like Zoom session psychotherapy with people? Do you do therapy sessions with people?
I'm no longer in private practice, but I treat many people every week, generally in conjunction with my teaching, or as well as my Sunday hikes. And
I wanted to get help from a cognitive therapist. how would they find somebody?
Um, let's see, the feeling, well, you can go to my website, feelinggood.com, and there's links there to find referrals both to a cognitive therapist or this new team CBT, which is even more powerful. Also on my website, there's tons of free resources for everybody. There's a free depression class. It's like I think 18 sessions, totally free. There's a free anxiety class to overcome anxiety. We're about to post a free relationship class, and you can listen to the Feeling Good podcasts where I teach all of this stuff that I've
And
had.
you just mentioned relationships. You know, the book subtitle is "A Revolutionary New Treatment for Depression and Anxiety," but you also deal with relationships and with addictions and habits. So it's very comprehensive.
Yeah, in fact, I took the chapters on addictions and habits out because I had to remove 10 chapters from the book because I just had so much to share. There was so much new stuff. I said, oh, this is just too much. It'll be too long. But if people are interested in habits and addictions, you can get those 2 unpublished chapters free on my website, feelinggood.com. You can click and download them. And a lot of people have been helped by that as well. But there's tremendous free resources on the website.
When you talk about addiction and habits, you're talking also about things like digital addiction and screen addiction.
Yeah, yeah.
And sex addiction, all
that
as well.
Yeah, plus food and drugs and booze. And again, like the book Feeling Great, it's all based on motivation and resistance. And I use paradoxical techniques in dealing with addictions, which a lot of conventional addiction therapists find shocking. Some love it. But for example, let's say someone is asking for help with something like let's say overeating. I have them do what I call the triple paradox. And this is a form with 3 vertical columns. And in the left-hand column, let's say, let's make a list of what's positive and awesome about eating as much as you want of whatever you want, whenever you want. People say, what do you mean? I say, well, it's tremendous to be able to eat great food whenever you want. Let's list the advantages. And then, well, one, it's easy, and I can have a source of comfort whenever I'm upset, and I can eat all these great foods, and blah blah blah. I can come up with a list of 10 or 15 wonderful things about binging. And let's face it, it is tremendous to eat food, to eat as much as you want whenever you want. And then the second column, now let's list what's sucky about diet and exercise. Let's face it, it's no fun to eat carrots. Let's face it, it's no fun to go out and jog when it's snowing outside and it's cold and you'd rather watch your favorite show on TV. So we make a list of all the negatives of dieting and exercising. And then the third column, we list what your overeating shows about you and your core values that's positive and awesome.
Like what?
Well, for one, you're a rebel. You don't have to conform to the mores of society. You're kind of a bad girl or a bad boy because you're doing kind of what you want to do. It also shows that you're giving yourself pleasure, that you love yourself, and on and on and on. That you want joy. The Dalai Lama says happiness is the meaning of life, and when you eat, you're happy. So this is the highest spiritual thing a human being can do. On and on and on. And then when the person has filled out these 3 columns, I say, well, my gosh, why in the world would you ever want to diet and lose weight? That totally sucks. Look what a beautiful thing that you're doing. You'd have to convince me. I don't see any reason for you to lose weight. And then I can tell you 100% of the time, they say, I hear what you're saying, Dr. Burns, and you just gave me what I need. I'm going to lose weight. And then they go and do it. It's a total paradox. The problem is when you try to help someone with a habit or addiction, you're guaranteed to fail. because everyone else is selling to the patient, pushing this, pushing that on the patient. And then the patient just, when people try to persuade us, the patient just pushes back and yes buts. And then the patient continues to fail, but now the failure is the problem of the therapist. It's the fault of the therapist. Oh, the therapist didn't help me with my sex addiction or my porn addiction or my binge eating.
But you know, I'm not sure I'm clear on why they suddenly get the light bulb going off. I mean,
Well, it's weird. It's really weird, and it has to be done respectfully. If you do it sarcastically as a trick, it won't work. But it's honoring. It's a form of deep empathy. That's really why the person is overeating. Do you see? It really is rewarding to eat Doritos or your favorite ice cream or whatever, and it really does suck to diet and exercise. People talk about this runner's high. I've been running for 30 years and I've never once had the runner's high. There's a road out here from Los Altos called Page Mill Road that goes all the way up to Skyline. It's 12 miles steep all the way up. I ran all the way up that road to try to get a runner's high all the way to the top. And when I got to the top, all I had was darn tired and felt ridiculous. I've never once had a runner's high. My daughter, I guess, gets it. So you're lucky if you get it, but most of us don't. And so it's just showing, I understand where you're coming from. And in a way, it kind of reduces some of the shame, but it's the same with feeling great. We do the same with depression. It's like, what does your depression show about you that's positive and awesome? I'm trying to sell the patient on remaining depressed and anxious. And the paradox is once the patient sees why they're so depressed and see that it's a good thing, it's because of their core values, paradoxically, suddenly they don't need to be depressed anymore. But part of it is shame reduction. It is somewhat mysterious, I would have to say.
You're talking about the two kinds of resistance, the resistance to outcome and the resistance to process, right? What you're doing is you're getting them to look at the benefits they have from maintaining the problem that they have. And then they can rethink how they have a relationship to that.
Yeah. Like, for example, the cause of depression is non-acceptance, and there's internal non-acceptance and external non-acceptance. That's the outcome resistance for depression. It's why depressed people don't want to recover from depression. Now, internal non-acceptance is because I don't want to accept the fact that I'm screwed up. I don't want to accept the fact that I fail, that I'm not as good as I want to be, that I'm not as good as I should be. And so I want to keep beating up on myself because I let my daughter go out and play. Do you see? And there was a bad outcome. And I don't want to accept the fact that I can fail as a mother or as a therapist or whatever. And so so letting go of that need to be special is inherent in the recovery from depression, but people don't want to let go of that need because we're taught by culture that to be worthwhile, you have to achieve a lot, you have to be special, and then you'll be a worthwhile human being who can be happy. And that's the belief system that gets in the way of recovery. And then external non-acceptance is that you feel you need some external thing to be happy and fulfilled, like wealth or say having a baby or having a family. A medical student came to me for treatment, and she said, could I get someone who uses the techniques in your book feeling good? And I said, well, sure, I can refer you to great therapists, but I don't know if you realize this, but I treat everyone for free. I haven't treated anyone for psychotherapy in 30 years. And so if you'd want, I'd be happy to work with you myself. But there's two things that you need to know. I don't work like other therapists. And so I would want to treat you in a 2-hour session and cure you in one session. And I can't guarantee that, but that's usually what I do. And then in addition, you'd have to do homework. after the session, or if we have 2 sessions, you'd have to be doing homework. And if you're willing to do that, then I'm your guy. And she said, well, Dr. Burns, the idea of a 2-hour session is great, and the doing homework is great, but I can tell you, Dr. Burns, I'm a hopeless case, and it's impossible for you to treat me and cure me. She says, I've been in therapy for 20 years. I've taken every known antidepressant. Nobody can help me. And I really am hopeless. And I said, well, why is that? And she said, well, you see, I'm the top in my medical school class, and I also have a PhD in basic research, and I publish in all the world's top journals. And people say, oh, she's got everything. She's the top doctor, brilliant. She's the top researcher. But you see, Dr. Burns, there's only one thing I ever
We need
wanted.
to wait, and we need to pause for a break.
Okay.
And you're going to come back and tell us that one thing.
All right. All right.
And my guest for this show is David Burns, MD. He wrote the book Feeling Good 40 years ago, and it sold over 5 million copies. He's an adjunct clinical professor emeritus of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at Stanford University School of Medicine. He's trained over 50,000 mental health professionals, and millions have downloaded his weekly podcast, Feeling Good, at his website, feelinggood.com. Now he has a new book out, Feeling Great: The Revolutionary New Treatment for Depression and Anxiety. So you were going to tell us about why she was still having a problem, even all that good stuff was going on in her life.
Yeah, she said, I don't care about any of that stuff. It means nothing to me. All I ever wanted was a baby and a family, but I don't have a boyfriend, much less a husband. And I've done research in the area of OBGYN, and I can tell you, Dr. Burns, it's a fact. It's a physiologic impossibility for me ever to have a baby. So you see, I really am a hopeless case. And in addition, she said, I was brutalized by my brothers when I was growing up, and there was nobody there to help me and support me. And that abuse was real. That wasn't a distortion. And I think about it all the time. And so you see, Dr. Burns, I really am a hopeless case. So she came over to my home office here, and we sat down for a 2-hour session on a Saturday, and I was just sure I had cured her. It was a fantastic session, I thought. And then she took the moods. I have patients rate their mood at the start and end of every session and rate me on empathy. And she did it right in front of me, and I looked at it. And not only had I not helped her, she was more depressed. And she gave me a failing grade on empathy. I was just so ashamed. And I says, oh my gosh, I screwed up. And I always measure things because therapists just don't know how patients feel. You can be so misled. I was very misled that day. And I said, I'm really feeling ashamed, but let me see if I can figure out the errors I made. Maybe we could try once more if you'd be willing. I don't think I empathized enough. She nodded her head. I should have let you talk more about your agony and the abuse and your desperation you feel at not having a child or a husband. And also, when you said you were hopeless, I insisted that you weren't, and that I've helped many hopeless people. Instead, I should have seen the wisdom in your hopelessness. And she nodded her head, and I said, well, if you want to come back, I'd love to try again. And she graciously came back the next week, and I empathized more, and she sobbed, and it was really kind of a beautiful thing, and had a memory of being beaten by her brothers and alone in her room and sobbing and no one there to help her. I said, maybe you'd want to go into that room now and talk to that little girl and tell her that you love her. And she sobbed. It was just really a great emotional thing. And then I said, and when I said you were hopeless, and maybe there's some wisdom in your hopelessness. Maybe that's a good thing. And together we listed 12 beautiful things about her hopelessness, like her hopelessness was protecting her from disappointment. Her hopelessness showed that she was realistic, because since every therapy had failed, her hopelessness showed that she was honest and a critical thinker. She wasn't going to be gullible type of thing. And we listed 12 beautiful things about hopelessness. Again, the same as I did with dieting. What's beautiful, do you see, about overeating? What's beautiful about your hopelessness? And it was a tremendous list. And I said, well, now I see how ridiculous it was for me to try to talk you out of your hopelessness. Uh, this is really a beautiful thing. And she says, yeah, but Dr. Burns, isn't there a downside to my hopelessness? Because she says, if I'm hopeless, I never will recover. I said, well, I forgot about that. That's a pretty good point. And she said, I want those techniques. Show me those techniques you've got. And so I pulled out a daily mood log. She wrote down her negative thoughts. I did a role play with her. She blew them out of the park and crushed everything. It took about, at that point, 10 minutes. And then I gave her the depression test again. Everything had gone to zero. She was euphoric. She gave me beautiful ratings. And that was it. That terminated her therapy. She came in one final time for relapse prevention therapy. But the cool thing is I didn't hear from her for a year and a half. And then I got an email from her and she says, Dr. Burns, you're probably wondering about your hopeless case. And I just want you to know that I'm as happy and high today as the day I finished therapy, but even more so. And maybe if you look at the photos I've attached, you'll understand why. And the first was a photo of her with her newborn baby. And she says, Dr. Burns, you were right. Miracles are possible. And the next was her wedding. And it just blew my, tears were going down my eyes. I was just so happy for her. And the next day, I walked at Stanford into the residence lounge to meet a resident I was supposed to supervise. And there she was with her baby in her arms and her husband. I hadn't seen her for a year and a half. And then she said, oh, Dr. Burns. And then she talked to her baby and she says to her baby, this is Dr. Burns. You better thank him for your existence. And she was there applying for a residency program.
That's beautiful. So we don't have that much time left. And I want to get you to list at least some of the cognitive distortions that are very common for people.
Well, a real common one, if you have social anxiety, is called mind reading. You think people can see how anxious you are, and you think they're not going to like me. I don't have anything interesting to say. One called fortune telling is the cause of all anxiety. You say, oh, when I get on that plane, it's going to crash. When I get up in front of that audience, they're going to laugh at me. My mind will go blank. I'll make a fool of myself. That's, predicting danger. Fortune telling is also the cause of all hopelessness, telling yourself, I'll never recover. Self-blame is where you blame yourself for all the bad things that are happening. You rip yourself to shreds whenever you make a mistake. All or nothing thinking is that looking at world in black and white. If I'm not a complete success, I'm a total failure. Overgeneralization, you generalize from some negative thing that happens and then say, oh, I'm a loser, I'm a failure, I'm unlovable. Mental filter is focusing only on your flaws and filtering out all the positives in your life. Discounting the positive is an even greater mental error, where you take the good things that you do and say, oh, that doesn't count because of all of my flaws. One of the huge ones that Ellis used to promote all the time, and he was right, is should statements. Shoulds directed against yourself.
Ellis called them masturbation.
Yeah, absolutely. And he had a real point there. Karen Horney, the feminist psychiatrist, was into the should statements even before Ellis, the tyranny of the shoulds. I shouldn't have screwed up. I should be better than I am. And then you have shoulds directed at others. You shouldn't have said that. He's a jerk. He shouldn't be like that. She shouldn't be like that. And Ellis and Karen Horney, they felt, I think quite rightly, that virtually all the world's suffering comes from should statements. And then there's emotional reasoning from how you feel. I feel hopeless, so I must be hopeless. I feel like a loser, so I must be a loser. Those are some of the distortions.
And you give in your book a complete chapter to each one of them on how to think about them, how to understand them, how to identify them, and how to correct them and debunk them. That's what it is, really. It's debunking, right?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, there's a cognitive distortion starter kit in Feeling Great, and shows you just how to crush each of these 10 distortions. And I gave some workshops on that, and there's podcasts too. You can listen to the Feeling Good podcast. There's a podcast on each of the 10 distortions now, and how to crush them.
Okay, so two last quick questions. What about in the time of coronavirus and COVID-19? How is that affecting people in terms of their cognitive distortions?
Well, it can't affect you. External events cannot affect you. Only your thoughts. And that's very liberating, because even when something bad is happening, your thoughts create your negative emotions, and when you correct those distorted thoughts, you can change the way you feel. And on my website, I have I think now 8 or 9 people I've treated live with what they thought were corona related depression and anxiety, and in every case they had distorted thoughts, and in every case when we crushed those distorted thoughts, their depression and anxiety disappeared. So there's a true rise in depression and anxiety in America and around the world, a doubling of depression and anxiety because of the CoronaCast. But it's a great message that you can change the way you feel when you change the way you think.
What is the most common distortion that's associated with COVID-19?
It's different from each person. There's no standard way to get upset. One woman was crying herself to sleep every night, that because her husband is an emergency room physician in New York City and an intensive care unit physician also. So he's constantly intubating the worst of the worst COVID cases. And he recently intubated 2 of his colleagues, which meant there was a high likelihood they were going to die. Doctors he was working with every day. And so he moved out of his house to protect his wife and daughter so they wouldn't catch the corona from him. And then she asked for a session because she was crying herself to sleep every night because, my husband's gonna die. It's unfair. But the thought that upset her the most was, I shouldn't be so upset, and I should hide my feelings from my husband because I don't want to burden him. And that's that should statement again. And then she was able to challenge that. I'm making a long story short. You can hear the treatment live on my podcast, but she began to dawn on her, well, this is ridiculous. Why should I not be upset? I have the right to be upset. This is a terrible time that we're living in. It's a horrible circumstance I'm in. Maybe I need to give myself a break rather than putting these demands on myself. And maybe it's okay to share this with my husband, because every time we've talked about our feelings, we've gotten closer. This is ridiculous. I'm supposed to hide my feelings from my husband. And that switch, suddenly her depression and anxiety went to zero.
It's for everybody, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
We need a wrap. We're going to have another session that will be a separate one where we're going to talk about how cognitive distortions affect politics and some really interesting stuff. So check back for the next one as well. My guest for this show has been David Burns, MD, who has a new book out, Feeling Great, the Revolutionary New Treatment for Depression and Anxiety. And his podcast website, where there's a huge amount of resources, is feelinggood.com. Feeling Book is the name of his first book, which has sold over 5 million copies. Thanks so much, Dr. Burns, for being on the show.
My pleasure, my honor. I loved talking with you, and I want to thank you so much.